would you go for being a brain in the vat if it meant like constant pleasure? Like, or you can think of Brave New World, like Soma, like you take a drug and you just experience constant pleasure through the dopamine that's released through that pharmaceutical. Like, is that something that you think people should do?
The challenging part about that thought experiment is that you don't know if you're a brain in a vat right now.
Debate.
No, okay, so I'm going to ramble for a second. So what you're bringing up is a really well-known philosophical thought experiment. It's called the experience machine. So the question is typically posed as, if somebody could put you in a machine and then you weren't aware that you were in a machine, but it gave you the perfect blissful reality, would you take it? Technically, if you're logically committed to being a consistent person that's answering questions in a reasonable way, your answer should always be yes, because once you're in the machine, you're not going to be aware that you're in the machine. Now, people intuitively will reject that conclusion because they'll say, well, hold on, I know that it's not real. But the reality is that once you're in the machine, you won't know that it's real or not. And right now, you don't know if what you're experiencing is real or not. So for instance, if I were to offer you a pill and I were to say, actually, you're already trapped in a liberal society, but I can give you a pill to enter a machine, and what that machine is going to do is it's going to wake you up. Now, it's going to be a society full of misery and war and post-apocalyptic robots running everywhere killing everybody, but it will be the real world and you have a chance to build something new. Would you take that pill or not? The problem is you don't know if I'm about to insert you into another dream or if I'm about to wake you up from the experience you're already dreaming about. So there's a lot to think about in terms of this question, but it gets into some very heavy, like, epistemic theories of truth. How do we figure out what is real or not? How do we figure out if our conscious experience is objective and grounded or subjective or not? I understand your desire to. I understand your desire to use this question to explore liberal versus a theological foundation for the world, but it's a very deep and heavy question. It's hard to just answer. On a macro level, I think that society has kind of a forced buy-in to where when you're in society, you have to act in certain ways in order to have that society work. Everybody kind of has like some forced level of buy-in. So this might be like we have some set of laws we have to agree with, we have to pay taxes, whatever, these types of things.
But I could sort of call it the sociopath trap, where we just sort of automatically assume that everybody's a sociopath.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Like, what are you going to do when you show up and you encounter the sociopath who's, like, ready to murder you?
Which is so annoying because the entire fucking body of psychology, I am not aware of any fucking large or small psych experiment or study that has ever been done that's like, we did this study and we found out at the end, wow, none of our subjects were influenced by this. Wow, all of our subjects were free-thinking, divinely inspired people, and we weren't able to influence them with these slightest social factors at all, right? Like, it's always completely the opposite. But anytime something happens, you know, this person is like a divine, like 100% in control of their destiny, completely free will, the most evil, horrible person ever. It's very, very, very frustrating. Yeah.
And it may be the case that indeed somebody is like a sociopath, been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, doing very bad things. But it's sort of like, you know, if that's the case, you got the math problem correct, but used the wrong formula.
Sure.
Like, realistically, probably a lot more things are true, and I don't necessarily think it sort of behooves us as a society or individuals to just automatically assume that, like, no, this person loves hurting people. Mm-hmm. And I want to be very clear, like, I'm not trying to defend Kyle Rittenhouse here. I'm not engaging in those subreddits. It's just, it's popped up.
And my guess would be, I don't even have the numbers in front of me, but my guess would be that it's probably still like a single-digit percentage of ASPD people that actually act out like in outwardly violent ways that are like committing crimes and stuff. I doubt it's like 80% of people with ASPD are out there like murdering people because we'd see these.
Because if you do that, you're in prison.
Yeah.
Like it sort of works itself out, and you know, I've had the opportunity to work with folks in prison and all that stuff. And you know, well, this is totally anecdotal. I worked in residential treatment for a long time, so kind of a big revolving door, and then I worked with a lot of folks in the community. So I've probably worked with a few thousand people at this point, in some capacity or another. And I've met maybe 3 that it's like, okay, yeah, they might be there. Like, they like to hurt animals, they get off on pain, that kind of stuff. But it's just incredibly rare. Usually it's just a tremendous amount of trauma, and trauma makes people do really funky stuff. That's not usually the best.
I say this through, when I talk about, I guess I'm curious your thought is
sure.
A lot of the times we talk about, especially on this stream, emotionally manipulative people sometimes, or people that can be abusers. And I try to be really careful when I talk about this, or I try to be really precise. I'm actually completely anecdotal
Yeah.
experience, so maybe the research doesn't agree with me, but when people act in ways that are emotionally manipulative or emotionally abusive, I don't believe, a lot of people think that these people spend a great deal of time kind of like plotting out their evils.
Right.
When in reality, I think it's more like, let's say you have a person who knows that if they cry, they'll get what they want. It's not like they're thinking like, okay, after he does this, I'm going to start crying and I'm going to get what I want. It's more just like you have a set of learned behaviors that provoke certain responses and you just kind of like default to them. But it's not this highly manipulative, sociopathic, like I'm planning all this stuff. It's just people, especially like some abusive people, just kind of like fall into a pattern of behaviors that like manipulate people around there. It's not like the most cognition. It's not like this ultra cognitive process where you're super thinking about every time you're doing it or whatever, I guess.
Exactly. Like there's sort of like a conditioned response to it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know what's what, but I notice that when I do these things, I get these results. And man, yeah. What I will tell folks in session sometime is like, you know, let's bring back the dick. Like bring back the jerk. Like this person is mean. This person's a real jerk.
Oh yeah, because like
Person's not nice.
when we talk on, especially on Twitter, even more, or maybe a little bit more specifically, something that I get so frustrated by is there are no more dicks or assholes. There are no more
Yeah.
mean people. There are only abusers, right? Like all of the language
Exactly.
becomes so much more tuned up, and it's like, was that person mean to you? No, that person was abusive, and it's like,
Exactly.
damn, like were they really abusive? Like, well, what do you mean by that, right? That person ignored you. That's not ghosting. That's abuse. It's like, wait, hold on, it's not really abuse. Like, yeah, people are very quick to. They've co-opted like all of the I don't know if you call it the therapist vernacular or like all of the domestic
Right.
victim vernacular, and now it applies to every single social situation you're in. It's like, geez.
Well, and I took some notes, and you know, this is kind of going through things. Like we don't have to go through any of these topics. If you got to you kick me out whenever you want.
Whatever you want. Go
But it's kind of going through some of these things about like, yes, and I think when folks are kind of maybe new to psychology, like newer students, that kind of stuff, it can be really exciting to learn a term that maybe explains something you've been thinking or feeling your whole life. And so it's just very like freeing to be able to say like, yes, this thing that really bothered me when I was a kid, that actually has a name, and that name is like emotional abuse or stonewalling or some such other thing.
Sure.
Or this person's a narcissist. What they're going off is like, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, they don't like it when people are critical of them.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you know who doesn't accept feedback? Somebody who doesn't like you.
Yeah.
Like, that's a person who might not accept your feedback.
And I don't know.
Nothing to do with narcissism.
I don't know if I would blame society at large or if I would blame psychology for this, but I really want. This is actually a huge criticism that I have of psychology. I wish they would have invented or created a whole new set of language or a whole new set of words or adjectives rather than either. I don't know if psychology borrowed from common vernacular first or if common vernacular borrowed from psychology, because I think it is actually so incredibly damaging. I hate the fact that like major depressive disorder, it has depression, that people call it depression, because it's not at all.
Sure.
It's totally not even related. It's a totally different thing than feeling depressed. And like it would be like calling like one thing like a chair and another thing like the color blue. Like they're so different, and it frustrates me so much that like NPD, narcissistic personality disorder,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't really have much to do with just being narcissistic or having a big ego, right? Like there's the diagnostic criteria is more specific than that. There's plenty of people that
miss
are
it.
yeah, there are plenty of people that
lot.
are narcissistic that aren't NPD. They don't have that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the idea of like traits versus diagnosis. Like all of us might have a personality disorder trait.
Sure.
If we are angry enough.
For sure.
Or amped up enough. Or if life has sort of taken a dump on us enough. The piece with NPD that really cracks me up is there's a huge component to that of grandiosity.
Sure.
You feel like, you know, you deserve to be with the upper crust of society. Good things ought to come with you. Like, I know it's going to happen. And that's often just missed for, like, this person won't accept my feedback or my criticism. Heretofore, they're a narcissist.
Yeah.
And it's really problematic. And what you're talking about with the language piece, so, like, tons of therapeutic models. Every therapist has their favorite, whether you know it or not. I encourage folks to ask them, like, what kind of therapist are you? What kind of work do you do? My big four, like I'm a big narrative therapies person. I also do DBT and a little bit of internal family systems, so I'll kind of swing in there.
Okay.
And the narrative therapy piece is sort of like, what is the story you tell of your situation? And how do you relate to that story? So like, something really bad happens to me, and is the story like I'm damaged goods? Or is the story like I'm a walking miracle? And so when we have really intense charged language, that very much colors the narrative. That very much colors the story. In a way that could be helpful for some, but could also be really unhelpful for other people. And I think you bring that example up a lot of times, like for somebody who's like truly experiencing pretty heavily, I don't know, it's like the meme with the guy from, what is it, Breaking Bad, like, we are not the same.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Like, I use this term because I was, essentially mentally tortured for years. You use this term because you're sad.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to take a dump on anybody's mental health here. It's just, these are things that can be kind of unhelpful sometimes. And, I mean, some of these terms, man, they sound cool. Like, they sound badass to say out loud. So,
And I think sometimes it feels a little like, now I'm this super armchair psychology, right? But like, you get this, ironically enough, you get kind of like, it feels validating to say that like an experience that you had was bad if you can give it like a really big label that brings with it a bunch more like serious kind of things, like I didn't just have shitty parents, like my parents were a combination of narcissistic personality disorder and all these other cluster B personality disorders, and they engaged in so much different abuse and traumatized, and I have triggers and PTSD, and it's like, damn, like really, like it's a little frustrating sometimes when it seems like every single person on, and I'm kidding, online now, but like when every single person on Twitter has like 6 different disorders, and all of these of course are undiagnosed and they're not seeking treatment. On a macro level, I think that society has kind of a forced buy-in to where when you're in society you have to act in certain ways in order to have that society work. Everybody kind of has like some forced level of buy-in. So this might be like we have some set of laws we have to agree with, we have to pay taxes, whatever, these types of things. There's some sort of like minimum level of behavior that's expected of you if you're participating in a society. And I guess the question is like how much harm is caused by certain behaviors, and then how much should those behaviors be mitigated to prevent certain harms. There are some things where you and I could probably agree that spreading diseases should be illegal or punishable. So for instance, like if I knowingly have HIV and I'm just running around fucking people and I'm lying about getting tested or lying about having it, and people are getting sick, I think we would both agree, like, hold on, like this is not good, like you're actually like killing people. Not to say that's the same as like the coronavirus stuff, but there's some level here that we agree on. So yeah, it's figuring out like what is the acceptable level of risk, I guess, that people can take, or something like that. Yeah.
If we like can agree on this like premise sort of like the subjective existence, then why do you think people get stuck in these cycles of just like regurgitating other people's beliefs? And then why do you, Steven, or maybe you don't actually, and that's kind of the caveat here, do you find yourself ever stuck in the bubble? No, summer right now. Actually, okay, I'm not gonna level you here because that's, I think, inappropriate. But I think what's important is that like I already know you're open, and that's like the key factor to any sort of form of intersection. So you're already like years ahead of like other people, right? So like, do you know that? Like, are you aware of that? And how does that feel? Or think, what do you think about that?
I think I don't think there's one answer to this. I think there's a lot of different things at play here. So one thing that I think is incredibly important to understand is I think that it's important to understand that the vast majority of, if I say like ethical and epistemic and metaphysical or ontological, a lot of these like broad like philosophical categories are going to be, these thoughts are not coming from people, but I think most of these or all of these are inherited. You kind of alluded to this, these are like these are George type, right? Most of these are inherited, and if you don't have a reason to, or you're not called to, you'll never actually think through these things. So for instance, like if you grew up like religious, you're probably never going to spend time like analyzing your morals. You're not going to think about like, does my moral system make sense? Is it like internally consistent? Like that's just not like, why would you ever think of that? You just don't need to. So yeah, so that's one thing. So it's possible probably to go through most of life where you never have to actually stop and question or be introspective over any particular belief you have because they're all inherited from family members or if you grew up and then you kind of stop there. That's one thing. The second thing is I think that evolutionarily, I think that our brains work really, really, really well at identifying and recognizing and establishing patterns. I think we're so good at that. We see patterns, we recognize them, and we make assumptions based on them. So like I can see like one rock in one area that falls somewhere, and then in another area I can see two big things of wood, and I know if they fall, it's gonna have like I can do so much with a priori knowledge plus my experiential stuff. It's like so good. But that doesn't work well for the modern world. Our brains are not suited because that type of like heuristic analysis will fail you. Like you'll see one woman, a black person do something bad, and then you're traveling there when you grow up, right? So I think that the way that we have to gather data today, the way that we have to think about the world is very inhuman. It's not stuff we're like naturally wired to do. So without some deliberate effort, either forced upon you externally or for some reason you decide to do it internally, you're not going to do it. I think that those are the two main. That was a long one. Those are the two main reasons why people are, I would say, get probably stuck in a bubble. That one, they inherit all of their philosophical beliefs without reflection in it, and then two, naturally have wired to question them. Naturally, kind of wired to just like kind of move around with these default assumptions. You don't want to challenge those things. So that was a long way. And it's one of those things where I say the same with philosophy and psychology. You don't have to be an academic to practice either of these things because you're doing them constantly, right? Like when you do psychology, when we're having conversations with friends, when we're raising our children, like literally every part of your life is going to involve interactions that fall into the domain of psychology or philosophy as well. We decide like what's right and wrong, we make decisions on should we do this. Yeah, and it's very frustrating sometimes. And I know there was some frustration when the alt-right was growing in 2016 and it was a little bit more popular, not like super popular. There's a lot of people, me included, that are kind of like looking to the academic world, and it's like, are you guys gonna like say or do anything? And I remember I would send out, because that's just back when I was emailing professors, I would send out emails and stuff, and generally the response was like, we don't really have those conversations, we don't really do that, we don't really like, we're not gonna come out and be like public debaters or have arguments over this, like this is just not, it's like, okay, well what the fuck, like what the fuck is the purpose of what you're doing? If you lose the battle culturally, it doesn't really matter what happens in the academic institution, because now policies are going to follow based on kind of like the cultural zeitgeist or feeling in particular thing. And that unwillingness of an academic to kind of step into the mainstream, I think is really frustrating sometimes because I think that voice is really needed and sorely lacking.